Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for week 13 of our Lunchtime Live series on Facebook, Instagram, and now YouTube. I'm Chandra Luckett. The past 2 weeks have seen our nation embroiled in racial unrest over the brutal murders of Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and other Black men and women. There have been demonstrations across our nation and right here in Metro Atlanta that have sparked difficult conversations in person and on social media about injustice and inequity in our country that has targeted the Black community. But how do we stand up for our brothers and sisters, address the trauma that so many of us are facing, and move forward with a call to empathy and action? That's what we're here to talk about today. And although we won't end racism in this conversation, we can do our part to begin the dialogue. So we ask that you ask your questions, but be respectful in doing so to make sure that we all hold space for each other. Today's guests include friend to the show, Rita Mathis, a licensed clinical social worker and therapist who is our director of training here at Chris 180, and Jaime Hunn, also a licensed clinical social worker who is the operations manager at the Chris Counseling Center Atlanta office and a therapist. Ladies, thank you so much for joining us today, and please take it away.
Well, good afternoon. What we've been experiencing, I can imagine that a lot of African Americans are experiencing ongoing post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms for doing things just such as surviving and being Black in America. We've seen countless incidents of people being harassed or even killed for doing common everyday things like going for a run or sitting in a coffee shop or even trying to get in their own homes. And I could go on. But as a result of this, people may be experiencing PTSD symptoms such as hypervigilance, intrusive thoughts, feeling hopeless, and always having to feel like they're on guard. And Jaime, this could have a real impact on their functioning.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think that it has. I think it's just been not acknowledged. It's been undervalidated. I think that Black people and people of color in our country have been gaslighted for a very long time, being told, well, that wasn't rape. That wasn't a microaggression. Surely they didn't mean. When in reality, like, these things have been happening for hundreds of years. And it is a white issue. Like, this is an issue that white people need to be addressing. This is something, 450 years ago, Black people were brought over here, and it was a really ugly experience. And so the ancestors, as well as the people currently, are experiencing symptoms of trauma.
Right. And that makes me think of Dr. Joy DeGruy, and she talks about post-traumatic slave syndrome and how multi-generational trauma has been ongoing. So when we think about PTSD, often that's on an individual level in terms of treatment. But with post-traumatic slave syndrome, it's the PTSD symptoms, but it's also the effect of not having social justice and systemic systems that continue to oppress people. And in order for there to be real change over time, those are the things that also have to be addressed in order for people for us to move forward.
I agree. And it's interesting to me how many books, how many movies, TV shows, just terminology like post-traumatic slave syndrome isn't normalized. It hasn't been normalized. And we had these really large things happen really close together in our society recently. And now we're having the discussions. But the reality is that, people have been oppressed systemically, economically. I mean, it's been an issue. And it's very sad that it's taken these events to get us where we are, and we have to be intentional about how we use this time and space.
Right. And what we've been seeing in the community are the protests, and they're ongoing, and hopefully this will help to have the conversations, to start more conversations and move us forward, hopefully so that there will be finally some systemic changes that are happening. So it's really, I'm starting to see the impact of that people are actually Black and white.
I agree.
Yeah, we're starting to see the changes that are happening as a result of that.
Yeah. And there's small, medium, big changes. I think we need more of the bigger changes. Most of us can agree. And I appreciate you bringing up conversations because I think, I mentioned that it is a white problem and it is something that white people need to be addressing in their homes and in their community at large. And what that means is we have to have conversations. So many of us are really uncomfortable right now. We're having trouble concentrating, symptom of trauma. We're having trouble sleeping. We're feeling uncomfortable in social situations. We're getting anxious when we're using our social media or we get on TV because we're getting a lot of messages right now. We're being flooded with messages about race. And why are we uncomfortable? It's because as white folks, we have not been exposed to this to the extent that we are right now. Black people and people of color live this day in and day out.
Right. And thinking about that, I am a 60-year-old woman, so I've been around for a while. And I can even think back to a time where there were no images of African Americans, even on the TV. And the images that were there were people who were like in domestic roles. But I can remember the first time that I saw an African American woman on television who was in a professional position, and she was a nurse, Julia. So that had an impact on me. And if it kind of helped to change the trajectory of my life. But that sort of points to the fact that even systemically on what we are reading about ourselves, what we've taught about ourselves over the years, multi-generationally, it has an impact. And that those conversations need to continue as well.
Certainly. Yeah, we think about the toys we played with, Barbie. What does Barbie look like? Come on. And those are the standards. Those are the standards that all people are held to. We grow up with these images and this subliminal messaging of what it looks like to be white, what it looks like to be Black. And if you're reading, which I encourage, to have these conversations is to inform ourselves. And so I'm currently reading White Fragility, which is written by a white author. And what I take from that is that it is on white people to help other white people get to where we need to be in terms of race and discussion and level of comfort. And so, yes, we are sent these messages throughout our lives that being white is better. Mm-hmm. How crazy is that? I'm saying that out loud because this is what needs to be said out loud. We have to have these discussions. It's uncomfortable. It doesn't feel good to say that there is a message that has been sent to us that white is better because that's not okay. But we have to call it. We have to acknowledge. The first step is acknowledging what has played out in order to make any sense of change. So yes, we're watching the Huxtables, which is great. We love the Huxtables. That's one. And then we can name countless other white shows. And so it's the Huxtables, or it's the complete opposite, where stereotypes are playing out and we're being shown images of Black men as a criminal and just severe poverty and things like that, which unfortunately is a large reality because there are systemic and the economic differences between people of color and white people it's there. It is there. You drive through Atlanta and you see it.
Right. And so like you were talking about, we have to begin to recognize systemically where this is happening, and how it's almost like it is, not almost, it's a part of our assimilation. That after a while, we just sort of accept it, that this is how things are. But in order for things to change, we have to face it and start to have those difficult conversations, both Black and white together, and acknowledging that there is systemic oppression that is ongoing, that impacts people's lives, impact their ability to get jobs. And it can ultimately impact their ability to walk down the street.
Yeah.
So it's really important.
Unfortunately, it is. It's so hard. It's so difficult, but we have to have the conversations and we have to call into attention our own biases and our own prejudice, because we're talking about the messages we've been sent throughout our lives and they impact how we see the world. So we have to acknowledge, I think that feeling I had, that thought that I initially had whenever a Black man was walking by me on the sidewalk, that was a prejudice. Where did I learn that? Where did that come from? And pay attention to it and be comfortable with receiving that feedback from yourself or from others and adapting it and moving forward, because that's what we have to do. And it's not going to be comfortable.
It's not. I see we have a question.
Yes. So this one is, I'm the only Black teammate in a small office of 10 to 15 people. Recently, they've wanted to have an open discussion on race, and I don't feel comfortable being on display and answering all their questions, as they will likely turn to me. I feel like it's re-traumatizing to discuss at work. How can I handle this without upsetting others?
And that often happens where the responsibility starts to get put on the Black person to educate and to fix things. So in this case, it's like you're saying, it's going to be on the white people to educate themselves and to understand for themselves what it's like, and not expect the Black person to represent everything and fix it for them.
Yes, 100%. And I think that's what we have to acknowledge. Like, white people need to be so intentional about how they're showing up for their Black colleagues and their Black friends, or whatever, Black extended family members, whatever it might be, because we have to save their emotional labor to take care of themselves, their immediate family, their community. Like, we need to reserve that. They have been surviving in this country for so long, and this is a white problem. This is a problem that was created by white folks. So we have to step up to the plate, read the books, watch the videos, look at all the resources, because I can tell you there is a plethora of resources about books you can read, videos you can watch, movies. Netflix just created an all Black Lives Matter category. So the resources are out there, and we have to do the work. And just please be intentional. Are you reaching out to Black people to take care of yourself or to take care of them?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And just, again, just being open to start those conversations, and those difficult conversations, even when it's hard, to be able to sit with that and just be open about it.
Yeah, and I can imagine we keep saying the word difficult and hard, and that probably feels a lot like, oh gosh, I don't know if I'm up for this, I don't know if I want to do it, and our natural avoidance steps up. And that's okay. I mean, it's okay, just acknowledge it, but the reality is that we're gonna mess up. We're not gonna be perfect. We're not gonna do great. It's just natural, we're learning, and learning is so uncomfortable. And so please, if we can do one thing, Black people have been uncomfortable in this country for 450 years. If we can do one thing, we just need to be uncomfortable. We need to put in the work. We need to do our research, and we need to step up to the plate.
Right. So if you have a question, please feel free to ask that. But to your point, I think that sometimes there's some complacency that happens when people kind of get comfortable with not having to do the work over time, and then the conversations are not happening. So we're at a point now, we have an opportunity now to do a real shift in consciousness and moving forward. So it's going to be about people being open and being okay with feeling uncomfortable over time.
Yeah, you're 100% right. Like, the status quo as it is cannot go on anymore. People are fed up, rightfully so. Rightfully so. So the status quo is done.
We have a question.
Yes. So this one is, I think my biggest question is that we as white women that care are reading books and donating and trying to learn more, but what can we do to personally support our Black friends? How can we be there for them in a way that's supportive and shows that you were there and here for them, but also not asking or expecting Black people to educate us?
Right. Well, two things kind of come to mind, and that is that you start to speak up when you see a racial injustice is happening. And also putting yourself out there a little bit, to be uncomfortable, to ask those questions, and to just be open and willing to talk about it. So being willing to be in that uncomfortable position.
Yeah. I think reaching out and just acknowledging, let's call into the room. There's trauma happening in our community. There is a lot happening, this discussion, we're getting flooded with this. How are you? And not how are you like I'm walking through Publix and my cashier asked me, how are you? How are you? And we can acknowledge, hey, all of this is playing out. I just wanted to check in on you and see how you're doing. And I acknowledge that I'm a white lady. I just want you to know that I have space for you.
Right. I love that.
They might take it and they might not, but you've done the work, you've checked in, And that is powerful. Don't get avoidant. Push yourself. Put yourself out there. We can't agree on so much. We can't agree on laws. We can't agree on politicians. We can't agree on whether a movie is good or not. And so there's not a one way is always the right way for how to respond to this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's fair to say that how Black people and people of color are responding to this in general, in terms of like the protests and riots and things like that, we can't say that there's a right or wrong way to respond to this. Like as a white person, I could not imagine, I never will be able to, what it would be like to hold this for centuries. And so how people are responding, we need to respect.
Right, absolutely. And I've heard you mention the word riot, and that, just to kind of say something about that, protest versus riots, because what they're doing, I believe, is more protesting, because riots tend to indicate something else. People have a negative, or like it could be, there's a criminal link to that. But I like to think of it, the protest is more powerful, and it brings up a feeling of being self-empowered.
Mm-hmm.
And I see we have another question.
Yes, we actually have several questions.
Okay.
So the first one comes from Grace, and she says, going off the last question, is there a good way to ask African-American coworkers and friends if they're doing okay while recognizing they might be exhausted and traumatized?
I would say, saying just that. You know, I want to just check in with you. I understand that you may be tired and traumatized right now, but I just want you to know that I'm here if you need to talk, and then wait for the answer. So just being really open and upfront about it.
And normalizing the response, like normalizing that you're at work right now and you're probably operating at like 50% of your norm.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes sense. That's normal. I hear that. You can't go how you used to go.
Okay. We have another question?
Yes, Jane wants to know, as clinicians, how do you see this trauma showing up for your clients? And as a non-clinician, is there a way that's best to respond?
Well, actually, yesterday I was working with a young man, African-American male, and he reported being afraid of what happens if I get pulled over by the police. Do you think that I might get killed? So that fear is real. So I had to help him to understand and empower him that there are things that you can do, even if you get pulled over by the police. There are things that you can do, like ask for a supervisor if you feel like you're being endangered. So our young people are being impacted by it. There's anxiety and depression that they're dealing with. And so we're working with them to help normalize this for them, but also giving them strategies to deal with the anxiety and depression.
Yeah, my caseload is predominantly Black. I only have 2 clients that are not Black, and it's showing up for all of them. Like we said, people are getting flooded with this. It's everywhere we go. So I have some of my Black clients where things are coming up from them, from their personal histories that they've never felt were acceptable to process, or it's just the way it is. I've accepted that this is how this is. And it's coming up for them because now the stage is being set that it's okay to have a responses, it's okay to feel this. And that is bizarre. That is tough to swallow, that, you know, we've been working together, we've been doing this for so long, and these stories that you have are coming up for you now. And there's no doubt in my mind that these stories that you're telling me have impacted you and the way you see the world your entire life.
Correct.
And then my white clients are also having large responses and feeling like, how can I get involved? Anxious, you know, I want to be participating. I need to watch the news. I need to do all this work, and I'm exhausted. And but I feel like if I take a break, then I'm not being a very good ally, and I'm not practicing being anti-racist. So people are uncomfortable right now, and it is uncomfortable. But as white people, we're building our distress tolerance around this, because again, this is something we haven't been faced with day to day. We are, and we should be, and we have to work to get more comfortable with it.
Right. Was that another question?
Yes. So a follow-up question from Grace is, I've heard a lot about community trauma, but don't necessarily know what it is or how it relates to what's going on. Can you speak on what community trauma looks like in the current climate?
Another word for that is collective trauma. And that is when a whole group or country even is being impacted. And you can start to have symptoms of PTSD collectively. And it ultimately changes the way that we move and act in society. For example, back in the beginning of the year, we probably never heard of social distancing. And so we're having to make shifts and moves in our world as a result of the pandemic. And so it does, a magnifying can look like trauma responses over time.
Yeah. And so we know that like so many of what we go through is what we call a parallel process. Like what you go through, I go through.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever we have a community and it is being, experiencing trauma, somebody is taken to jail, somebody is murdered, so there is violence that's playing out within the community. Everybody is affected. I mean, we hear gunshots, and then the next morning, so the gunshots go off at 3 a.m. and the next morning there's youth that are waiting to get on the bus to go learn math. And so just being mindful that like hypervigilance and things like that, those are experiences that people that are having community trauma, and it's across the board. So it's what one is experiencing, they're experiencing.
Right. And it definitely ultimately it will have an effect on their functioning and how they move throughout the day.
And respond to other people. Right. Like if they're more defensive or things like that, we just have to be mindful of what this community has gone through. I mean, Flint would be a good example of a community who feels oppressed and not taken care of by the people in charge. And that is traumatic. My caregiving system, the government, is not taking care of me and doesn't have my best interest in heart. Therefore, that impacts how I operate in the world around me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do we have another question?
So we do have a follow-up question, and it says, I've always believed that I don't see color when it comes to my friends, but I've heard lately that the statement is problematic. Why? I truly believe we are all the same.
So we're not all the same. And so I've heard before when you do that, you may be discounting the experiences of other people when we kind of want to look at us all the same. Our histories are different, our experiences are different. We can be open and willing to learn about different populations or different people, but our experiences are totally different. And so that part is going to impact the way we move in the world, the way we operate in the world.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's right. We all have different experiences. We all come from different cultures and things like that. So it's so important to honor that. And being different is great. Like we want to celebrate that. Yes, do we all have like the same organs and like blood? Okay, yeah, we do have those things. But we come from such amazing backgrounds. To live in California, to live in New York is different. So yes, to be white, to be black, to be Mexican, it's different, and we just want to honor it and we want to celebrate it. So that's why we call it into the room, because there's nothing to be ashamed of. Like, right. Yes, this is something we want to celebrate.
It reminded me of a story that my great grandmother told me about explaining racism when I was a very small girl. And she said, you kind of think of it as a garden. And in this garden, there's all these different flowers, and they're all beautiful and unique in their own way, but they're all flowers. But we have to celebrate the differences and recognize the beauty in all the different flowers.
I love that. That's so wonderful, Rita. I love that. So let's talk a little bit briefly about strategies for moving forward. We've talked about reading the books, watching the movies, listening to the podcasts, all of those things, talking amongst one another. Those are action steps that we can take. We also want to emphasize like talking to our children. Right. You know, there's a difference in how Black parents talk to their Black children and how white people talk to their white children about race. So we really need to pay attention to that and start sending the messages of diversity and inclusion early on. We want them to have that exposure so that we can create a new history. We are not going to keep things status quo, and we need them to do that.
And another strategy is to start, as white people, being willing to stand up to racial injustices, like I said, as they're happening, so that you're not complicit in the problem. If you see something, start to speak up and take that risk of not agreeing by being silent about it.
Yeah. There's a saying that, what is it? Silence is like quietly endorsing. Mm-hmm. So you're kind of endorsing what has already been said, and we don't want to endorse. I don't want to put my name on a microaggression or something like that. So yeah, speak up, be uncomfortable, it's okay. And then on the other side of that, put your humility aside and just acknowledge like, okay, I have room for growth. We all do, myself included. I am doing work right now. I am not an expert. I am doing work right now, and I encourage you to join me. And I might do things, I will do things wrong, and I will misstep. And when I do, I'm going to accept it, receive it, and keep it moving, because that's the least I can do.
We have another question.
Yes, so Kim says children will return to school possibly in August. What suggestions would you offer educators who desire to create a safe space for students who have race concerns prior to returning to school? After returning to school, what tips would you offer school officials who are afraid to address racism and mental health in response to recent injustice?
I think that could be a topic for like next week. So that's a big one. That's really good though. I would say just acknowledging it and validating it. I think being seen, these children just want to be seen. I want you to see my struggle, and I want you to validate my struggle and do what you like, keep me safe. So again, to Rita's point, speaking out and saying, hey, that's not acceptable. We're not doing that. And just honoring that youth. And I think as I was hearing the question, there just needs to be such a bigger push for incorporating Black history into our history classes, because there's so much that we don't know and that we weren't taught.
And so that's what I was going to go with, is education, and starting to educate our young people about racism. We celebrate Black History Month, and there's a time when it's really highlighted, but it's something that should be ongoing, just like we talk about everything else. So in thinking about the kids coming back to school, holding space for them to talk about what that experience has been like for them, and then following that up with education and ongoing education about it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think pulling on them to help make the decisions. We say that we don't want to put like Black people and, you have to tell us what to do here. That's not necessarily what we're doing, but there's research on this. Let's do the research. Let's get our hands dirty. Let's look stuff up. Let's Google. Let's see what other places are doing and what we can bring into our school.
So we have another question.
Yes, this one just came in from a private message, and it says, how do you get past the feeling of being numb to the things that are happening right now? I'm angry, but I can't express it because of the numbness.
Wow, that's actually one of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. So I want to normalize that for you, that is a natural or normal response to trauma. I would encourage you to reach out and talk to someone, seek maybe help through Chris 180. We have services available to help you, but definitely just being able to reach out and get help, but understanding that that's a normal response to post-traumatic stress disorder or just stress, period.
Yeah, definitely take care of you. It's really hard. It's really hard work. There's a lot of exposure right now. And Rita said it's normal and it's hard. Yeah. You have another question.
Yeah, so this one says, how can I talk to my children about race if they already are older in high school or junior high? I don't notice them with a diverse group of friends, and I wonder if it's too late.
It's never too late. But I would just start the conversation with them and asking them what their thoughts are about race. So that kind of can give you a gauge of where to start. What are their thoughts about race? What do they want to learn about it? And then start to have those conversations around that.
Yeah, I agree completely. We just want to ask the questions. How are you doing right now? How are you receiving this message? And have it be a dialogue, not this is how I feel, this is going, okay. And we move on. We have to keep the conversation going. Let's try not to let it stop. Let's get more information. Let's question information. Let's get curious about it. I think that's so powerful.
We have another question.
Yes, so this one comes from Leslie. It says, my 16-year-old white son has organized a demonstration tomorrow of young people at the corner of a major intersection in our primarily white suburb with signs to show their support for racial equality and the Black Lives Matter movement. It looks like there will be a fairly large turnout. I know it's important for white allies to follow versus taking the lead in these efforts. So what can he do tomorrow, and what can all white allies do to ensure the message is clear that we are there to support the people of color in our community versus making it about us?
Well, you're already doing it. First of all, kudos to your son.
Yeah.
But just that visibility helps, that willingness to stand out and say, I am an ally. And what a great way to do it with the work that he's already doing. That's awesome.
Yeah, I participated in a protest on Sunday that had a similar experience. The people who organized it just put a post up in the Facebook group where they were organizing and said, we want to acknowledge some of the concerns that have come to us about not having enough Black leaders heading this protest. And we're going to move forward with this protest. And like we said, we want to reserve the emotional labor of Black people right now to take care, because this has been going on for 11, 12, it's been going on for multiple days. So let's show up. We're taking this and we're going to head it on. And that's what we need to do. So great job here.
I know, that's great. That's awesome that he's doing that.
Yes.
Yeah, have another question.
Yeah, so this will be one of our final questions. As a Black woman, what's a good way to engage friends in dialogue? I want them to understand that their silence isn't okay with me, but I don't want to be seen as combative.
Well, I think what you just said, putting that out there, tone of voice matters, but just being really honest and just saying and asking for what you need in a very honest and frank way is important.
Yeah, I agree. I think reflection, just reflecting what you see. I noticed that a lot of my friends on social media are saying, I like my friends that are Black are posting, I notice silence on my social media page and saying, I'm wondering about that. I noticed that because this is not silence. We're flooding. I know you're seeing it. Why aren't you calling it into the room? And I worry because I just want the response to feel safe for you. And that's really hard, to be the person facilitating the discussion and not being so sure what you're going to get back. So it's hard. I think that we are really seeing people in different lights right now and, deciding who's in our tribe.
Right. And we were going to talk about some resources that might be available.
Yeah. So there are these really amazing Google Docs and websites that are circulating right now with tons of resources for anybody to be enhancing their knowledge about race in America and how we got here, what we should be doing or could be doing right now, and how we can move forward, and tons of ideas. So like I mentioned, I'm reading the book White Fragility, which is really amazing. The Hate You Give is really great. There's so many. Sean King does amazing work, the Grassroots Law Project. There's so many things circulating. Just look up hashtag Black Lives Matter on Instagram and you'll see all kinds of different organizations. Campaign Zero is also really interesting. I'm talking about police reform. We're going to post some of these resources in the comments section. So follow up and make sure that you see those. And also Chris 180. We're here. We are, trained in cultural competence and we strive to serve our community. We know that we serve predominantly people of color here at this agency. So we're here and we want to normalize, validate, and support everybody as we go through this time. And it's going to make history.
And one final thing, just what you said earlier, how the media is actually stepping up to put out information that could be educational on both Netflix. I saw it on Prime, whole sections on African American history. So just stepping up and being able to research for yourself and educate yourself.
So thank you so much to Rita and Jaime for this powerful conversation today. Your comments, your feedback will help all of us to grow and be able to move forward as a community. We could not do these conversations without the support of our community, and for each one of you for joining us to talk about what I know is a difficult topic. But we ask that you take one step forward, that you share this video with other people who may be interested in learning more about what services we offer and how to start that conversation in their communities, at work, and in their neighborhoods. We challenge each one of you all to be an activist for change in our community and to support the Black women, men, and children in your lives. We look forward to being a part of this conversation for the weeks, months, and years to come. And we ask that you all join us in that. We'll be right back here next week, maybe to dive a little bit more into this topic and other topics surrounding the current pandemic situation we're all living in. We thank you for being here and for being a part of the Chris 180 community. We'll see you next week.